we want to challenge them a little bit, and if they'll accept the challenge, we have 3 questions for the panel. And what we're going to try and do is get through these 3 questions in order. And so here's the first question. I'll just tell you all 3 questions so that you can get a sense of where we're going. Because you're such a great panel, it would be a shame not to ask these big questions. I can see that David's taking notes, which I appreciate.
He's probably already answered them.
Exactly. He's written a book about them. They're spy character. So, the first question will be, has the world's failure to stop Ukraine, the war in Ukraine early, so in its first year, to stop it in its tracks, open the door to all the rising global disorder we've seen since 2022, all those new conflicts? The second question, should Ukraine respond to Russia's nuclear saber rattling by getting nukes? And the third question, should Europe call America's bluff and push back on the bullying? Okay. Anne, I may start with you if that's okay. Let's go back to the first question. Has the world's failure to stop the Ukraine war early in its tracks led to all the rising disorder? Brief answers from everybody, please, if you don't mind.
So please, thank you for... Oh, okay, yes, can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me here. First, I would like to say that I come here as a politician, not as a commentator, not as a journalist. And as a politician, I'm supposed to make decisions and find actions to be taken. Of course, if I want to ask directly your question, as a politician, maybe we can directly say that we have failed. However, I would bring some comments on that. I first want to say that I need to read the players. And the players, Russia, China, of course, and the USA of Mr. Trump. And as a politician, when I need to make decisions, when I read the players, I need to understand what they want, not what they say, to make decisions on that. And I have to say that we also have to think of what we can understand as a European Union citizens. Here, I cannot consider that we have failed as a European Union, because what we have learned is we definitely need to be united and to speak as one. And the main thing that we need to send is that as European citizens, as a French citizen, as a French politician, I need to make Beijing, Moscow, Mr. Trump understand that we don't need anymore their permission to exist. We don't need their permission to solve our problems. And that's the first thing that we have learned through this war in Ukraine. And we need definitely to move forward and make sure that we move as united. And we need not to ask ourselves whether the other one are getting weaker. We need to make sure that we get stronger. And we have to build on our strength. And I remember last year here, Mr. Brzezinski was here. And he just called to us Europeans saying, what are you waiting for? You have the demography, you have the money, you have the patents, you have the talents. What are you waiting for to show your strength? So this is what we have learned from this war. We have not failed. We have now to show that we are strong, and we have everything we need to show that we are strong.
Yep, thank you. A point Donald Tusk is making too. Evelyn.
Okay, you asked 3 questions. I'm going to try to go through all
just the first question.
Just the first one.
Yeah, just the first question.
Oh, I got nervous. I wrote them all down.
Well, thank you for writing them down.
Okay, well...
Only everyone was like you. Has the world's failure to stop the Ukraine war early in its tracks opened the door to all the conflicts since 2022 that we're now experiencing?
In a sense, yes, but the door was already open in 2008, because in 2008, when Vladimir Putin invaded Georgia, the country of Georgia, we did not do enough, and he got the wrong signal. And frankly, we blamed the victim. And when Ukraine was invaded and the territory was seized, I was in the Pentagon, and I know very well all of the conversations we had with our European colleagues and inside the government. And we were very worried inside the US government about Europeans blaming Ukraine for being the victim of Russia. So part of the caution that came out of the initial response to Ukraine came from the failure to respond properly to and understand what Putin was doing in Georgia. And that lack of understanding and that stubborn inability to comprehend the threat posed by Russia continued up until I would argue, relatively recently, and maybe even this new Iran war is helping open many more eyes. So I will say it's Georgia.
Vitaly. First question, would it have all been different if the world had stepped up and this war had come to an end in its first year?
Actually, I have a question regarding your question. So, what did we manage to stop since the 1990s? Which crisis was realistically or really stopped? Was it Yugoslavia? Actual de facto aggression of Transnistria in Moldova by Russia? De facto control of Russia over Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the Georgian War, the Chechen Wars, Crimean annexation, and the war in the Donbass. What did we manage to stop before 2022? With this very simple line, as I enumerate these events, we can make a very simple conclusion. After the collapse of communism, instead of building a new world order based on rules and values, what we did, we all together, we were simply powerlessly observing how the world order that was established after the Second World War was being ruined by Russia and China. And eventually, we saw it complete destruction first by the President of Russia, and then, I can congratulate you, by the President of the United States. Although I do not know how you can ruin something that has already been ruined. And that is the response to your question. Now, the principal question is how it supported lack of stability in the world, because everybody already understands that it has been ruined. Now, on those ruins of this post-war order, can we build a new order? And who will build it? Would it be we or Putin and Chairman Xi? And that's it.
Okay. So I'm seeing a theme between you and Evelyn. It's a longer-term problem. David.
So I don't think that we can blame the events since the invasion 2022 for the degree of disorder in the world. There are so many causes. George Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003 set off cycles about the misuse and failure of American power that still are with us. I've been covering the Middle East since 1980, the year after the Iranian Revolution. The shockwaves from that revolution still shake the Middle East and the world, and we're dealing with them now. The failure to stand up to Putin, to see Putin for who he was before us in 2014. The U.S. and Europe failed utterly, as has been said, and we're haunted by that now. The failures since 2022 to be as strong as the United States and Europe might have been also haunt us. I have to say, just to close this, it's really uplifting to be in Ukraine. If you're in Washington, you have this sense that the world is falling down on your head, and here you have the sense that the good guys are winning, or at least they're not losing, and it's very refreshing. Thank you, Ukraine.
Natalie, everyone's pushing back on my question, but wouldn't it have made a big difference if things had worked out in the first year here?
Well, yeah, of course they would. I mean, I think these things can be true at the same time, right? It's clear that, the war didn't start in 2022, as Evelyn was saying. It is clear that there are other causes to wars elsewhere, as David was saying. But I think it's equally clear that, to use an expression that late Pope Francis used, this is a quote-unquote Third World War in pieces. And the first piece of this Third World War is precisely what has been happening in Ukraine. But I think it's worth reflecting on what exactly we mean, precisely given that there are things that happened before this and things that have happened since. And to me, the one element which really marks the nature of this age of disruption that we're living in is the shattering of international law, is the unrecognition, not just the violation, the unrecognition of international law. And I think this is what really marks a massive difference. David was mentioning the war in Iraq, and that, of course, was a massive violation of international law. But when the war in Iraq happened, or rather prior to it taking place, the United States went to the UN Security Council, tried to rally consensus amongst its allies, tried to get a UN Security Council resolution. Now, as we know, it ended up lying to UN Security Council, going ahead, unilaterally even without, but nonetheless it tried. It was a violation of international law. It was not an unrecognition of international law. And this is what I find so different now, right? What is happening now, and it started in Ukraine, and it is continuing in Gaza, in Iran, is that unrecognition. And to the extent that that order was based on laws, on norms of institutions, and that what is being unrecognized, then I think you're absolutely right in saying this was the first piece of the domino, which has basically fallen since then.
Thank you for trying to make my question sound credible. And Morgan.
Well, thank you. I can just echo, I think, with the two previous speakers about the last point here. On your question, well, was it all about if we had stopped Russia the first year, should things be different? Yes, of course, it should have been different. But the process started long before that. And as a matter of fact, I think that the problem is that many of our leaders nowadays tend to forget why we once set up the international rule-based order, why we set up the United Nations 80 years ago, why we set up the UN Charter. Why did we do that? Well, that was to avoid and to prevent, so we would never ever have to go into another world war. And what we are seeing now is that now, 80 years after, many leaders are leaving that international framework. Russia has done it, of course. That was one of the reasons why Sweden and Finland joined NATO a couple of years ago, because we saw that was our path was most secure for us, this new politics. But as we now also see how the United States is behaving, I would say reckless in many aspects. I mean, the Iran war now, was there a plan? And if there was a plan, it's obvious that it's failing. So we have to go back to respect for international law, respect for human rights, respect for the international institutions again. And then there is again mixed signals. I saw on the news today that Trump has invited Putin to the G20 meeting later on in December in Miami. And I just wonder why. I mean, Putin should not be invited to anything except his prison cell. He should be in jail, Putin. So sending mixed signals like this that different countries now are doing, that is very, very dangerous.
Thank you for that, Morgan. So I'm going to turn to the second question now. Should Ukraine respond to Russia's nuclear saber rattling by getting nukes? See, there's a lot in that question. Today, we're focusing on the 40th anniversary of Chernobyl, and just before I set the hair running, and you all answer the question, if you're absolutely not going to go down that route, ultimately we would like to know what would stop Russia in its tracks. But please try and engage. David first.
So it's hard for me to advocate as a means to greater security more nuclear proliferation in the world. Just doesn't feel right. I understand that until Ukraine has some kind of nuclear guarantee, it won't feel entirely secure against a nuclear Russia. The United States is not, for the foreseeable future, going to be a reliable provider of nuclear security guarantee for Ukraine or for NATO, for that matter, in my view. What I've been hearing at this conference is really striking. It's like the moment where you just see Europe's fingers come together in a fist. And the answer surely is for Ukraine as a part of Europe to be part of a European nuclear security arrangement that has to be figured out pretty quickly. The idea that Ukraine unilaterally should seek nuclear weapons strikes me as probably a pathway to an even greater disaster than we already have.
Natalie.
I completely agree. I mean, if the question is, should Ukraine go nuclear? Well, obviously, no, it should not. But I think what makes your question not a completely crazy one, this one too, is that, you know, why are we even talking about this, right? And why are we talking about this in Ukraine? Why are we talking about this, or rather, why are they elsewhere, I'm thinking here mainly Iran, talking about it in the Middle East, right? And I think, you know, going back to this connection between, you know, different war theatres, the tragedy is that what has been happening over the last year has given all sorts of really perverse incentives, right? Because indeed, if you are Ukraine, the, in a sense, logical conclusion was, well, you know, giving up nuclear weapons has ended up where we are today. And tragically, if you are Iran, you actually reach exactly that same conclusion. Had we gone for the bomb like North Korea had, we probably would not have been invaded. And we would have not have ended up like, you know, Muammar Gaddafi when he gave up his nuclear weapons in Libya, and indeed Ukraine. So I think what we need to reflect on is, why is your question not a crazy one? You know, what are the twisted incentives that actually these wars have sent out to the world, and what can we do about it? And when it comes to Ukraine, I completely agree with what David just said. Given that it is what it is, the answer, the should answer, is not Ukraine should go it alone, but Ukraine very much should be part and parcel of those broader European discussions launched by France, UK. I mean, you know, thinking about how the nuclear question in a European context necessarily needs to be rethought, given the, let's say, more questionable ironclad guarantee that comes from across the Atlantic.
Vitaly.
Well, I don't know if you have noticed that since 2022, the very notion of a nuclear state and what it can achieve has changed considerably in politics. When our war started, it was considered that Russia's territory is untouchable, because otherwise there will be a nuclear war. Then it turned out that we can do deep strikes into Russian territory and nothing happens. Now we see that Ukraine makes systemic strikes on Russian territory and nothing happens. Iran makes strikes on American military facilities and nothing happens. So the notion of a nuclear state being untouchable, this notion has no longer does no longer exist. Here in Kyiv, we know that there are dangers even worse than nuclear weapons. When you block the Hormuz Strait, this can result in terrible disruptions in the world. We saw the blowing up of the Kakhovka Dam by Russians. The consequences were very close to the consequences of a nuclear strike. So Russia brandishes nuclear weapons proceeding from the old notion of a nuclear state. But basically, in a modern warfare, an army of 1 million drones can have the same impact as nuclear weapons. So we basically need to work out an agenda in which any weapons of mass destruction, from nuclear weapons to mass ballistic or drone attacks, will not be employed in the future. This is a question we have to answer in the future.
Okay. 1 million drones. So really, this question is slightly morphed into what is the correct deterrent? That's where we're going with Evelyn.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said before, and I think to add to what Natalie was saying about international law norms being destroyed, one of them is the failure of sufficient political will to stand up to nuclear proliferation. And I don't believe that Ukraine would be any safer necessarily if it had a nuclear deterrent. So I would agree with our Ukrainian colleague that there's still conventional warfare potentially. I understand a lot of people think that it could escalate naturally to a nuclear exchange, but I think there is enough evidence to counter that argument. But if Ukraine had a nuclear weapon and if there wasn't this new nuclear umbrella that Natalie just mentioned, a European umbrella, then Estonia would want their own nuclear, deterrence, if that's the logic that's going to prevail. So I think the better exercise is, frankly, to look at, in the short run, what's an umbrella that could be offered to Ukraine that's also nuclear coming from Europe, because I also agree with my very wise colleague, David Ignatius, that the United States can't be relied upon for that right now. But I also think the entire regime needs to be rethought as we move to smaller modular nuclear reactors, as the technology in the nuclear realm changes, as we have drones that are capable of carrying dirty bombs. I mean, I think we need to reestablish the norms and reboot, I know it sounds so old-fashioned, arms control.
So a nuclear umbrella, Anne. Can you provide one?
That's a good question. As you know, I come from France. Actually, you were questioning here the security guarantees for Ukraine. And definitely, if we think as Ukraine as being a member of the European Union, which I think and I hope deeply that will happen someday, it means that through Article 42-7, we need to provide some security guarantee to Ukraine. And we are facing a country which is a nuke country, which is Russia. And this will ever be. And we also know that, as it was said before, that we know that we cannot rely on the umbrella coming from the US. So it has to come from the European Union. And of course, as the President Macron said a few weeks back, we can consider the nuclear deterrence from France as being enlarged to other European countries. And this is the way that we could provide some more security guarantees to Ukraine. And of course, this doesn't mean that we should not think about the other way of deterrence, which is conventional deterrence, not only nuclear deterrence also. But regarding the nuke aspect, I don't think that also Ukraine could easily become a member of NATO, because this was, as it was said before, probably a huge destabilizing problem regarding the reaction that could come from Russia. So clearly, through the European Union, as being a member of the European Union, through Article 42-7, that's the way that Ukraine could be better protected and could be not a nuke country, but a nuclear protected country.
And how quickly could that happen, even before full membership?
That's a good question. I'm not so sure that I have a precise answer to that one, but it is true that we can see through the support that we are bringing to Ukraine today that Ukraine is part of a security guarantee for the whole of the European continent. So just thinking about that, we also need to consider the enlargement of the nuclear French deterrence as also maybe covering the interest of Ukraine. That's not an easy decision to be made. And just remembering also that nuclear deterrence in France is made by France, thought by France, and made by France and decided by France, whatever happens.
Morgan.
I think we have to see the broad picture. I think we have to be very, very careful on the nuclear weapon side. We used to have 5 nuclear states. Now we have 9. We have Israel, North Korea, India, and Pakistan. I mean, imagine a world where we don't have 9 anymore, but we have 15 or 20 or 25 or 30. So that's what's at stake, I think. Then it's just a matter of time before we actually have a nuclear war upon us. The discussion on the NPT treaty is going on, as you know, in New York these days, and actually we are a delegation going to New York on Monday to take part of those discussions. And I really hope that the world can come together in re-establishing some kind of arms control again, because not only is the NPT challenged, but we also have a situation where the treaty on between Russia and US is no longer in effect. So we have 9 nuclear weapon states. We are over 180 other states who do not have nuclear weapons, and it's up to us to say to these nine countries that you have a responsibility here in order to make all of us assure the others, all of the others, that you can control this situation, because otherwise, I mean, there are so much at stake if we lose control on the nuclear weapons side.
Okay, plenty of ideas there about a deterrent for Ukraine. Let's now go back to that point you were talking about, the way that Donald Trump is acting, Meaghan. Let's come back to you on this other question. Should Europe call America's bluff and push back on the bullying?
Well, yes, I think so. I think it's just very clear message that Trump understands. I think that was the lesson we saw when he was talking about Greenland and threatening Denmark. It was when Europe and a number of other countries came together and said that enough is enough. We can't accept this anymore. And then he had to back down. And I think that is a very, very important message for us, how to deal with that kind of behavior. But then we have now on our hands the whole Iran war situation, which I think it's obvious that has gone out of hands from the Americans. I don't know if they had a plan. If they had a plan, it doesn't work. We have jeopardizing the whole world economy, and also making moves like that is also pushing away actors that U.S. should have had some as friends. We say that support for United States is falling around in the world, so they are losing their soft power, and that is also something that they have to understand. That has to be understood. It's not making America great again. It's actually making America weaker if they are losing their actors, big countries, and support from around the world, pushing away Africa, pushing away Latin America, pushing away countries in the Southeast Asia.
Ça suffit, Anne, that's enough from America?
If we constantly listen to what he says, we are constantly lost. So my question is not what is Mr. Donald Trump saying. He's the so-called self-acclaimed chief executive officer of the United States Private Limited, and that's how he apparently makes his decisions. So for us, again, I come back to this, we need to rely on our own strength and our own decisions. We cannot rely on what he wants. We're not so sure of what he wants. We're not so sure of what he has decided. He can go back and forth constantly. So we need to work on our own strength, and we do have strength. We have to be confident in the strength that we have, and we have many, many of them. And as a politician now, I need to convince my public opinion, my citizens, my fellow citizens, that we have strength, because the question that we have now, because public opinion, I have to speak 1 minute about that, because when they listen to the news with what is happening, what Mr. Trump is saying or not saying, they are lost. And so maybe the question of Ukraine could be swept away and forgotten. And that's a major threat to us. So my purpose to me, the reason why I'm here today, is just to convince, and I would love that more and more politicians and more members of national parliaments be here, to then come back to their own citizens and explain why we need to support Ukraine, why we should never stop supporting Ukraine, what we need to put and to speak as one voice, because Mr. Trump is speaking on himself with many voices, so we need as 27 members to speak as one voice and explain that we are strong and we can be stronger facing Russia and the threat that Russia represents today.
David, I mean, in any of your spy novels, would you have a plot like this where we're sitting here in Ukraine and we're hearing from Meaghan that he's inviting Putin to the G20? I mean, what's going on?
If novelists try to invent a character like Donald Trump, critics would say this is completely implausible. Try again. I think first on should Europe call Trump's bluff. What I've been watching, certainly since Davos, is Europe reaching the breaking point. Last year, Europe's reaction, in large part, was kind of nice kitty, it'll be okay. People trying to flatter him, ignore a lot of his statements. That ended, I think, with the Greenland demand and the speeches in Davos, the rebellion of European leaders. No, we're not going to tolerate this again. And I think we've been seeing more and more of that. I must say, again, this conference has confirmed to me how strong and independent Europe's pushback has become in a healthy way. I just want to very briefly caution against what I'd call Trump schadenfreude. It's so easy to dislike Trump that you can begin to delight in his misfortunes if you're opposed to him. And I worry that there's a bit of that going on now with Iran. Iran maintaining the control of the Strait of Hormuz is a bad thing for the world, a very bad thing for Europe. And the idea of standing apart from attempts to reestablish freedom of navigation, proper arrangements in the strait, because you're so angry at Trump for having messed things up, is really, I think, unwise. So I caution against that. Just a final point. General Mark Milley said to me once, I'm sure said to others, that he always wanted to distinguish between a Donald Trump tweet, social media post, announcement, whatever, and an order that had to be followed. I mean, Trump lives to disrupt. He lives to dominate the news cycle. His positions can change 180 degrees in a week. So, I'd caution against. There's some things. If Trump invites Putin to Miami to the G20 summit, that's a turning point in this story that needs a strong reaction. But a lot of the things he says, I think, need to be recognized as attempts to disrupt, attempts to get attention, not the same as General Milley would say, orders.
Evelyn.
Well, David just gave me a great idea for one of the ways that you guys can respond. But look, I think that if you take President Trump out of the equation, we still would have been in a similar situation, although far less tricky, which is to say that that for years now at the Munich Security Conference and all kinds of private meetings, American presidents, American secretaries of defense have told Europeans they need to take on more of the burden. Now, this is because people take so long to adjust to reality. At the end of the Second World War, and I'm not a historian, but I'm going to try to sum it up really quickly, the United States said, okay, we don't want you guys to be so strong. We don't want you to fight one another. We'll give you this umbrella and do your thing and be a good partner and defend your borders and don't make wars. And that worked for a long time. And then we woke up and realized, wait a minute, this is a really good deal for Europe. And in some ways, they have a more balanced society, etc. So it took a while, I think, for everybody to realize we're really out of the post-World War situation in terms of political maturation or political confidence building across the continent. And by the way, this also applies to Asia. When I go to Japan, the McCain Institute, we just did a Sedona Forum, our annual conference in Tokyo. It's a similar situation, similar evolution, where we didn't want the Japanese to do anything really after World War II, but now we want them to do everything. And what do the Japanese do? They don't speak a lot, so they don't pick verbal fights. They just strengthen as much as possible, and they don't hedge towards China. So please don't hedge too much towards China. And then also, please make yourself strong. But I would add to it what David said. Why should you accept an invitation to the G20 if Vladimir Putin, this bloody war criminal, is going to attend?
Boycott. That was the idea.
Like the Peace Council.
Okay. It wasn't to take away Trump's phone. It was to boycott the G20.
Yes, just like the Peace Council, all of your heads of state said, thank you very much. Either I'll consider it and get back to you. Maybe Mogherini said that. Or no, thank you.
No, thank you. All right. Well, there's a decision that needs to be made at a later date. Natalie.
So I think there's a question of substance and one of consequences. On form, indeed, as was said, if we were having this conversation a year and a half ago, Europeans were being advised by many American friends and colleagues, all you need to do is flatter Trump a little bit, and, he's a narcissist, and it's all going to be fine. And, they tried, probably first and foremost, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the flatterer in chief, tried. And that
calling
method...
him daddy, exactly.
Daddy and a lot more, right? And it failed, right? So, there is evidence that suggests that kissing the ring and bending the knee does not deliver. And actually, what does deliver a lot more is politely saying no. I'm not saying, giving the middle finger to Trump. I'm not suggesting that, but just politely saying no. That is a method that in terms of, results has actually not led to the sky to fall on our heads, right? So I think there's a question of form there. And there's been a learning, process there. Then I think there's added to this, there's a point about substance. And I think you can almost divide this up into sort of two categories. There's one category of issues where on substance, Europeans have really bent the knee, right? And I think you can put definitely trade in this category. And I think to an extent, trying to keep the US on side on Ukraine. And again, it hasn't delivered. It hasn't delivered on trade. We got an awful deal, and one which every other day Trump actually threatens to violate, right? So it has not worked in the same way as, trying to keep Trump on side on Ukraine by basically saying, oh, well, we're going to transform 28 points into 20 points. It hasn't worked, right? Now, what has worked better, and I'd put in the second category, on the one hand, Greenland, and on the other, Hormuz, is basically saying, on Greenland, no, and a clear no that manifests itself with a willingness to actually, I know it's just a few soldiers, but I think Arctic endurance as an exercise showed something meaningful in substance. And I think Hormuz, coming to David's point, one thing is to say, no, and therefore we revel in a disaster, which is not obviously the case and would be absolutely wrong. But another is to say, and we're putting together a different kind of coalition of the willing in obviously a post-war environment, so it's not something to be done now, but we're willing to take on a greater role in terms of Hormuz and Gulf security in that broader coalition. So I think, again, there's a question of substance. Third point that I wanted to make is about consequences, because over the course of the last year and a half, actually what has been happening, and I think one of the reasons why you see Europeans also more willing to stand up, is that the United States has been giving up its cards. I mean, Trump loves to tell, Ukrainian President Zelensky that he doesn't have any cards. Well, the truth of the matter is that the United States has fewer cards today than it did a year and a half ago. And so this loss of leverage, particularly when it comes to this war, enables Europeans to basically say and act in a way which maybe a year and a half they were unable to do.
Thank you. And I want to give, Vitaly, I want to give you the last word. Just give us a few moments to all plug in so that we can hear every word. We don't miss the beginning of what you've got to say. And your answer, please.
Generalissimus Joseph Stalin once asked how many divisions the Pope has. The same question to Leo XIV is asked by Donald Trump. It looks like runs in the family. And he's also asking how many divisions Prince Harry has. But let me ask you, how many divisions Donald Trump has at his disposal? When we saw that it's been 40 years of war, 40 days of war, against the country that has been for decades under sanctions, lost U.S. Losing its potential, that it will take them decades to renew their potential, when U.S. were unable to protect their own military facilities, nor their allies in Persian Gulf, when Ukrainian military specialists are helping U.S. military to counter Iranian drone attacks, and Ukraine is not the leader in military strength. The U.S. has always were. When the tariff war with China has led to the one single threat of the leader of China that they will not be providing rare earth metals, all tariffs were scrapped as if nothing happened. So it's not the question how we're going to blackmail Donald Trump, but how should we help him to rescue himself, the U.S. and us, because that he pulled us down. Because even when Donald Trump doesn't think he needs any help, very soon he will find that he does need assistance. It's a matter of clock, which is ticking. And it may well be that this clock is ticking for the U.S. as well, not only for Iran, because the U.S., unfortunately, and here the Soviet Union and Stalin had huge advantages, but the Soviet Union is part of the world economy, unlike the Soviet Union. That's why I suggest we think about creating an effective system of security to rescue the United States. Because if we rescue them, they will rescue us. It's a protocol of any modern hospital. That's what you do.